Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Kooky's Occult Animal Sanctuary by MythologyLovesHorror. When Sam first heard that there was an animal sanctuary outside of Hope, Pennsylvania, he laughed. It wasn't the idea of an animal sanctuary in that location that was funny. It was their blatant false ad that had him chuckling. The huge wooden sign which was stuck haphazardly on the side of a dirt road, encouraging the reader to come and visit animals who were occult victims. He kept driving, shaking his head at the prank. Teenagers in rural Pennsylvania must get really bored, and he shrugged it off until he saw another sign a few miles down the road. 3 more signs later, Sam couldn't help but admirably think they were very persistent for pranksters, and he was almost tempted to see what would happen if he followed the signs. On a whim, he pulled over, spilling coffee on his shirt in the process, and he sent his sister a quick text to let her know that he might be a bit late. Rather than going straight down the road like he normally would to get to her house, he took the next right. 10 minutes later, he'd reached an old, run-down barn with a brightly colored banner hung neatly across the doorframe. It welcomed visitors to Kooky's Occult Animal Sanctuary, and it had a picture of a cute kitten in a witch's hat on it. Sam followed the signs to the visitor parking area and was soon standing in line at the ticket window. There were several other people there, some with children, and everyone seemed curious about the attraction. $5 wasn't bad for a ticket, and somehow the cute salesgirl also managed to talk him into buying a cup of animal feed for the petting zoo portion of the sanctuary. The group passed through a pretty flowered-covered archway that marked the beginning of the tour, and Sam made small talk with some of the other people there while they waited for their tour guide. None of them had ever heard of the sanctuary either, and they were pretty skeptical about the sign's claims. One little girl looked up at Sam, her eyes wide, and solemnly stated that she would be happy to see any animals, even if they weren't super special. He nodded in agreement, and just then the ticket salesgirl came over to the group. "Hi, folks. I'm Gwen, and I'll be your tour guide today. Is everyone ready?" Sam nodded eagerly, and she led the crowd past the arch into a small trail. The sides were lined with brightly painted wood fencing, so Sam couldn't see anything, but as the cluster of humans progressed, Sam began to hear odd sounds. Some sounded animalistic, while other noises he couldn't quite place as easily, and after another few yards, the wooden fencing gave way to chain link for a better view. Gwen was talking about how she founded the sanctuary a year ago, when someone had stolen her kitten and tried to sacrifice it in a satanic ritual. Sam was listening intently to her story until he got to the first exhibit. The group stared in fascination as a flock of headless chickens ran around, their cauterized necks not stopping them from attempting to peck at bugs and flapping around like normal. Gwen was telling them that most of the chickens didn't live too long, but that they were guaranteed a good quality of life at the sanctuary for as long as they survived. The oldest one, Clucky, had been there since the beginning, and she was even a mother to a beautiful little flock of cute, normal-looking chicks. One of the chicks ran up to the fence, and Sam watched with a smile as a little boy gently patted it. He wanted to stay and study them more, figure out how they ate and drank. But as Gwen moved the tour along, she addressed that for the curious onlookers. The most common question we get asked about the chickens is, how do you feed them? The answer is simple. We give them IV nutrients so that they don't starve to death and stay hydrated. The crowd broke out into wild applause. None of the group had ever seen anything like that. And while it was completely bizarre, it was also extremely heartwarming. Gwen told them that there were 4 exhibits to see in all, plus the petting zoo. And Sam was eager to find out what was next. Exhibit number 2 was dogs. Sam had grown up with dogs and could immediately tell that they were happy. There were about a dozen, and he sadly noted that some were missing eyes, tails, and other various extremities. That was when he saw one that resembled a zombie. It took all of his logic to remind himself that it was probably still a farce. Gwen turned to the group. A smile lit up her face. "All right, who will be my brave volunteer?" No one spoke or moved for a minute, unsure of what they were being volunteered for. So Sam finally raised his hand. "Great! Follow me, please." She led him into the dog's enclosure, and the canines ran to greet her. Gwen was immediately buried under a pile of wagging, woofing bodies, and after a moment she extracted herself with a laugh. It was a doggy paradise in there, with tons of room to run and play, as well as food and a house for each dog. She gave them all treats as the group watched in fascination, and when they were chewing away happily, she asked Sam to call one named Rob. With a quiet shrug, Sam looked at the mass of happy wagging hands, and he snapped his fingers. "Rob, come here." He wasn't sure which one Rob was, until the zombie-looking one shambled over. His paw steps were uneven and lurching, and for a moment Sam was afraid. He nearly backed out of the enclosure, but with Gwen's coaching he took a deep breath and held his hand out. He was expecting a putrid smell to hit his nose as Rob closed in, but nothing did. The dog put his cold nose into the palm of Sam's open hand, and Sam looked at him up close. Rob was lacking some clumps of fur, and one ear was missing. His skin was so thin that in some places the bone could be seen, which is what gave him the undead look. He licked Sam's hand with a dry tongue, and Sam gave him a gentle scratch behind his ear. "Who's a good boy?" Rob's tail stump wagged crazily, and he turned and shuffled away. Sam watched him curiously, and the dog returned a moment later with a big red ball. He dropped it at Sam's feet, and his big eyes implored the human to throw it. Sam did, and he laughed as a dozen dogs eagerly chased after it. One of the other dogs ended up getting it, so he made sure to throw it a second time, just for Rob, while Gwen distracted the others. Gwen had other visitors join them, and soon every dog had a friend to play with. Sam figured that they must have been spent 30 minutes in there, and when it was time to go, he gave Rob a hug goodbye, promising he would visit him again. Gwen herded the visitors over to the next enclosure, where Sam saw several sheep milling about. Gwen gave the group a little history lesson, saying that the sheep had been used in various rituals across multiple continents for as long as humans had recorded history. These sheep were no exception. At first, Sam didn't see anything special about the Ulangates. They were grazing peacefully like any other flock he'd ever seen, when suddenly one of the rams stood up on its hind legs. It let out a loud bleat, and its head began to spin around like it was an owl. It was chanting something in what Sam thought might have been Latin, and the air crackled with an electric tension that hadn't been there before. Several tourists nervously backed away from the enclosure, though Gwen assured everyone that Sean was completely harmless, and that the demonic-looking goat was still an herbivore. Since Occult had performed a ritual on him, which had been to try to use him as a vessel for the Christian devil, poor Sean hadn't quite been himself. He was now prone to bouts of head-twisting and speaking in tongues, but otherwise lived a happy, normal life. The group didn't linger long there, as Gwen sensed they were collectively uncomfortable. She led them on to the last exhibit, and Sam was curious when he saw that it was just a single cat in a 10-by-10 enclosure. It watched the approaching group curiously, and it surveyed them in what Sam thought was a too human way. He didn't know what to expect, but he could tell this was not an ordinary cat. Gwen stopped the visitors outside the enclosure, a sad smile on her face that Sam knew wasn't there earlier. "Do you all remember when I told you about my kitten?" The group nodded collectively. "Well, my little Susie didn't make it. The cultists never plunged the knife into her like they meant to, but her heart gave out from fear. The sick excuses for humans decided to play around with her corpse, and they were able to, well, change her." The little girl, the same one who talked to Sam before the tour, raised her hand. Gwen nodded to her, encouraging her to speak. "Yes, sweetie?" "Why is the kitty all alone? Like, with no friends, how the other animals get to have?" Before Gwen could respond, the cat stretched, moving from her curled-up position to stand on her back legs in a humanoid fashion. She got up, walking to the gate and letting herself out. A gasp went up from the crowd, including Sam. The cat strode over to the little girl who tried to hide behind her mother, but the feline purred reassuringly until the girl looked at her again. "Little one, I am alone because I choose to be. I cannot stand company who is not as intellectually inclined as I am." "Huh?" I like to talk to smart people. People like you." "Oh, okay. Are you a monster kitty?" "Yes, but not the bad kind." The cat stood nearly at the same height as the child, and Sam could tell that her breed was one of the large ones, most likely Maine Coon, since she still had the distinctive M on her forehead fur. She looked at each and every person in the eye. Her gaze seemed to linger on Sam. When no one else spoke, she gave a curt nod, returning to her enclosure and once again curling up, like a normal cat. There was silence for another full minute. Then the crowd bombarded her with question after question. In the space of 2 minutes, Sam found out that shrimp was her favorite food. She lived in the house with Gwen as a roommate and agreed to be an exhibit in order to pay her share of the bills. She still enjoyed chasing mice like a normal cat. Her self-chosen name was Selena, and she was the one who had put up the signs out on the road. The feline took all of the questioning in good stride, answering the avalanche of inquiries tirelessly. She kept glancing at Sam before the group left her enclosure. She whispered something to Gwen. Gwen grinned, nodding in agreement. Then she ushered everyone to the last area, which was the petting zoo. They were brought up to the barn that Sam had seen when he first arrived. It turned out to be filled with cute baby animals. Gwen had an arrangement with the State Fish and Wildlife Service Department, where she helped rehabilitate wounded animals, and she fostered any orphan babies until they could be placed in proper facilities. Sam got to meet a cranky old badger who was recovering from a hit and run, an eagle who had a wing in a sling, and a mountain lion who was recovering from surgery after someone shot him. He fed the food he had bought earlier to a cluster of baby goats and deer, and as he surveyed the strange place, Sam noticed he couldn't keep the smile off his face. The cynic in him thought that this was a facade, and Gwen was trying to pull the wool over their eyes. A part of him thought that Sean, Rob, and Selena were all animatronics, and this whole place was built on lies. Then he looked at the face of the baby animals and the happy people in the tour group, and he realized that it didn't matter. The tour ended a while later, and as the tourists went to leave, Gwen flagged Sam over. "Hey, I didn't catch your name earlier." "Hey, it's Samuel, though I prefer Sam." Gwen shook his hand enthusiastically. Then her expression turned more serious. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Sam. Now tell me, how'd you like the tour?" "It was amazing. The rehab work you do here is commendable." "Aw, sheesh. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. It isn't always easy work, you know, so it really makes my day when people enjoy what we do here." She tilted her head, eyeing Sam as though trying to decide on something important. "I know this is going to sound crazy. Not like this whole place isn't, but I have an offer for you. We need someone else to work here. This place is growing, and it's getting to be too much for Selena and I to keep up with. I know I don't know anything about you, but you just seem to fit in here, and she agrees. How does a job sound? It won't be glamorous, but I can promise you it'll never be boring. And you can help me save animals from psychos." Sam stared at her, his jaw gaping slightly. Had a total stranger really just offered him a job at a place he had thought was a hoax not even 3 hours ago? Gwen was staring at him expectantly, so he concluded that he wasn't hallucinating. He thought it through for a few more moments, and a smile slowly spread across his face. "I'm probably nuts, but that sounds amazing. I need to give my job 2 weeks' notice, but I can be back here next Wednesday. I only live a half-hour away. I come this way sometimes to visit my sister, so that makes things easy enough." "That's incredible. I know I sound like a total lunatic for inviting you on board like this, but Selena has good instincts and I trust her. I think you'll really like it here, and I can admit that I'm glad you're not from another state. That would have been even more awkward." Sam left a bit later, the job paperwork in hand. This was going to be an interesting adventure, and he couldn't wait to actually help rescue some animals. So quoth this raven. Mythology Loves Horror always delivers great stories. Let them know either in the comments or visit them on Reddit. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you leave a comment, I'll do my best to comment back. I love it when you do. Subscribe if you haven't done so. And ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will see you guys again next time, my darlings. Bye-bye.